the first thing is, of course, to be empathic with the reasons why distress is unpleasant and people want to get away from it. And so to express understanding and empathy for that so that the client recognizes me as an ally. And then what I do is I propose to people that we could do exercises together to make it easier for them to experience distress. And I usually describe the initial exercise, and I think it's important to not talk about it, but to actually create an experience where the person's doing it from the gate. And so what I propose to them is that we do something that I know will raise their distress level. It's usually talking about some topic that they've been avoiding. It might be revealing something that happened to them in the case of trauma. It might be talking about feeling depressed or anxious in the case of someone with avoidant personality or an anxiety disorder. It might be talking about using a substance that the person's highly dependent on or addicted to in the case of substance misuse. And what I tell them, though, is I say, I'm going to propose that we talk about this for just 30 seconds. And at the end of those 30 seconds, I'm going to work with you to distract and get away from it so that your distress doesn't go beyond 30 seconds. Would you be willing to give that a try as an experiment to see what happens? Now, I set it up as a behavioral experiment. And what that means is I ask them to predict. I'll say, what do you predict will happen? What's the worst you can imagine could happen if you talk about this or stay in this state of distress for 30 seconds? What's the worst? Now, it's interesting because sometimes people predict that they will literally start freaking out and going crazy. And if so, I asked what their image is of that, because it makes a difference whether they see it as just kind of like, or if they see it as, I'm going crazy. So I try to get their image of what it is they think is going to happen. Then we talk about what can we do to get them out of that state of distress. And it's often something very simple, like we're going to talk about something, what's your favorite television show that you watched last night on television? Okay, we're going to talk about that when we're done. Because something has to be engaging enough to get their mind off the distress. So then we say, okay, let's do this. I'm going to watch my clock, 30 seconds. I'm going to stop you. Tell me what you can about this issue that seems too hot to touch. And so then they'll begin talking, and usually they do get distressed quite quickly in talking about the situation that they've been avoiding. And at 30 seconds promptly, I interrupt them. I say, okay, that's 30 seconds. Let's talk about that television show last night. I didn't see that. What's that about? Who are the characters? And I ask them, pepper them with questions to get their mind engaged so they can trust me that I am, in fact, going to stop their distress at a certain point. After a minute or two, I ask them, are you still feeling distressed? And if they say no, if they say yes, we'll keep talking about television or something, but they usually say no. And then I'll say, okay, let's look at what happened. How high did your distress get from 0 to 10? With 0 being no distress, 10 being the most you've ever felt. And did that worst case scenario happen? Did you go crazy? Did you do something? Sometimes their fear is about me, that I will judge them or be critical of them, that I appear judging or critical. And they're usually a little bit surprised that it wasn't as bad as they thought. And then I'll say, now let's review what the benefits would be if you could talk to me about this situation. And then we'll review benefits of facing distress. And then I'll say, okay, let's do a second experiment. How long do you want to do it for this time? Do you think you could do 1 minute? Do you think you could manage 1 minute? What do you predict's the worst that would happen? We set it up as another experiment, do the same thing over. And that usually goes pretty well. And then I invite them to do it for 2 minutes. And eventually we get to the point where I tell them, let's just talk about distress without a time limit. You can stop whenever it feels too much for you. And that puts them in the kind of in control. And I find by the time we've done these little exercises and they trust me that I'm not going to want to plunge them into distress to the point where they fall apart, that I'm really going to be there for them and listening with them, listening to them. and that we are going to be trying to learn something from the distress, make links, understand what's triggering them in the here and now related to this thing that perhaps is so distressing that they've been hiding all these years. And I find by the time I've done this, usually even just one session of these little mini experiments, that then clients are quite able to tolerate the distress of talking about things in therapy.